Okay, this is episode 10 of Narrative Wake. I'm the usual host, Thorin, sponsored by EsportsPools, but for some weird reason today, sort of enthusiasm for that's died, so we'll just move on from that. But it definitely is. So everyone in here just got to deal with that, really, haven't you? So, usual co-host, Kelsey Moser, who somehow is even more gothically lit in this episode than when she literally lived in Germany. Just in China right now. It doesn't really make sense as to why that would be the case, but it is. So, looking like some sort of Anne Rice character. I think I'm not some sort of archivist. Maybe you could be in that world, that lore. A lot of people don't know about that stuff because you're all too young, but that's not my fault. You can read a book at any age. Our guest for this episode, legendary EULCS and Season 2 top laner Wickd, playing for teams such as CLG.EU, Evil Geniuses. I mean, we tried to forget that bit a little bit. It started to go downhill already then. But there was Alliance. No, the good Alliance. One LCS, actually the most dominant split ever. Then there was also the Alliance Kaboom thing. Again, move past that. Listen, bad things happen to everyone. Keep moving past that. But then there was Elements. Yeah, about that. Yeah, Elements, shit. But after that, he played everywhere. He played in teams all over Europe. Then he went to Turkey. So actually, in some ways, I wonder if some sort of curse actually happened in that Kaboom game. Because it's like by losing to a wildcard team, eventually you became in part of a wildcard team. Because you play for Dark Passage eventually, a classic wildcard team at many worlds. So, Wickd, where are you at right now? Do you still play for a team? Have you technically retired? Are you going to try and play again next year? Where are you at the moment?
So right now, I'm just trying to make content and create content. I'm doing streaming and then YouTube. That's basically it. I think as a pro player, I have a unique view into kind of content that can be made. I have experience, obviously. I can make different content. Okay. And then also, I can kind of reflect on the teams more. Like I made a recent video about Fnatic, for example, where I can talk about the players because I know the personalities really well. I know how they mix. And I can see why they're having problems and so on.
Are you actually, at this point in your career, do you consider yourself retired as a pro? Are you one of those people who will always try and play if you can?
Like if I get a really good offer, I'll go for it. Like if that's money-wise or if it's because it's a really top team. But I don't want to join a shitty team in LCS and just lose because that's super depressing. I hate losing. And I tried losing and it doesn't feel good. So I don't want to do that. So
you tried it. Okay, I'll give it a try.
We tried it. We tried an element. It wasn't good. So I'll avoid that one.
Okay. So actually, to start this episode off, since you referenced there knowing some of the people in Fnatic, right? For people who don't know, because they're going to think to themselves, well, the Fnatic of your era was very different. It was the Expecke, so as no. Yeah, but you have to realise the new players in Fnatic are from Denmark, so presumably Wickd has some background on some of them. Do you know players like Bjergsen and Caps around before they'd gotten into Fnatic? Do you know them well?
So I used to do Kill the Bjergsen almost every single day. We played hundreds of games together. And Caps, I've actually played in a team with. We played in challenges together for once that I think me and Caps. So I think Caps is really good and he's very underrated as a player. He just needs to be given the right conditions.
So then tell me this then. So Fnatic have now been in two high-profile situations where they've had problems. One was they were in the semi-finals and they lost to Misfits in an upset at the time. And now in Worlds, listen, not that many people had them getting out of the group, but most people thought, they should be able to compete with the Immortals and Gigabyte Marines, etc. And at the moment, they're 0-3. So kind of touching on what you said before, what do you think the issues have been for them at Worlds?
So I think the issue with Fnatic is that their personalities, they don't have anybody who's a leader. They're all kind of fragile. Like you see Soares writing his tweets and everything after losses. Bjergsen is new and I know he's a nervous player. Caps is kind of childish, which is fine, to have a guy like that on the team. Then have Jessis, who I know is childish as well to some extent, so they have two feeding off each other. And then Rekkles, who's also fragile, right? So I don't have the guy to be a leader and so on. For example, back in the days when I played CLG.EU, we had Snoopy, who was like our cornerstone, our rock, that was solid. They lack that thing. So when times gets tough, it's going to be way tougher for a team like this. If everything goes good and they're winning, it's going to be fine. No problems, no nothing. But then you start losing, people start turning against each other. At least that's the experience I had. Then I played in teams, we start being like, this guy's bad, now it's this guy's fault. And you just start throwing blame around to everybody instead of trying to work on the issues. Instead just focusing on all the bad things.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is if you look at the personality makeup they have in Fnatic, I kind of agree that it's not ideal in that sense. Because, for example, like the most veteran player in the team is Soaz. And here's the thing. Yeah, Soaz, good teammate, really great player. But unfortunately, throughout his entire career, he has been someone who doesn't handle losing very well and who does, if he doesn't in the game tilt, he definitely tilts outside the game, as you see by all his tweets and all the comments he always makes of people criticising him, He's not exactly the sort of guy where, ideally, with young players, I would want a veteran who's like the kind who's like very laid back, they don't get rattled by things like that. If they lose, they're like, listen, don't worry, like we'll prepare better the next game, Soaz seems like he gets suicidal every time he loses a Worlds game. It's really bad luck. If I'm the young players, I'm like, fuck, is this what we're supposed to do? And then the only other person is basically Rekkles. And obviously Rekkles didn't have to be a leader in all those past teams. He always had Yellow Star, he had Expect here, he had all these other people. So I do feel like it's a tough mix in that sense. Because I actually think skill-wise, it's a pretty good team. It looks like as a squad, they should be good enough to get out this group. But they haven't won a game. What do you think, Kelsey? What are the issues you've seen from Fnatic?
Yeah, I think that the part of the problem was during the regular season, Fnatic was a team that really just didn't want to lose games. And so in a lot of ways, they looked for ways to band-aid or to just like fix problems short term in really, really almost cosmetic, obvious ways. Like, okay, Rekkles wants to play side lane AD carries because he thinks this is how they win and this is the only way they win. And the setup in that sense, and then they decide to play meta, but then he still stays with AD carries that kind of just win lane, and they continue playing this style without really identifying where they went wrong and their difficulties holding mid, their difficulties with Baron control, and then in a sense they're still just kind of like looking for really cosmetic or short-term solutions with picks like Cho'gath or Cassiopeia to try to make up for the fact that they have poor Baron control decisions. They try to go for picks like Rise and Twitch to make up for the fact that they have difficulty holding mid because those champions have a lot of, I guess, like invisible pressure just by if you don't see them on the map, it's hard to overextend. So I think they're not necessarily addressing their fundamental problems. They're just looking for all short solutions because they've been afraid to lose in the past, and they were really proud of their only losing one game in the regular season. And as a result, they never really dealt with some of the issues that they have in a meaningful way.
Okay. So one of the things about this group, one of the factors I thought was interesting was most people, when Fnatic had their failures, a lot of the criticism just went on Broxah, basically. Like, people were like, he was like kind of like what we saw in the regular season was he just got away with it, and people didn't know how to punish him, etc. But in theory, in this group, like, it's not like the entire group's filled with killer junglers. Like, yeah, the Levi guy from Gigabyte Marines clearly is like a maniac, he probably is a pretty bad example to have. But Smithy, more of a team jungler. Car's actually the most criticized player on Longzhu. Most people think like basically you could replace him with most people and they'd be as good. Have they actually been exploited at the jungle position, Kelsey, in these games, do you think?
I think that's less the issue. I think it's more... my criticisms of Broxah have always been more about understanding where he needs to be on the map at a given time, and given how their lanes are set up, or, for example, one of the most difficult things, and this could be because of the fact that they're two rookies and they don't necessarily have leadership to help guide them in a certain way, but Caps and Broxah, if they have a strong 2v2, they almost never punish it. So that type of situation, just identifying where they're strong on the map, is what I criticize Broxah for. I think, meanwhile, a jungler like Smithy is actually pretty good at that. I don't necessarily think that that's why they lost the Immortals game. However, a lot of the stuff that they lost the Immortals game with was like compositional, also how they set up in sideways versus mid and things like that. So I don't necessarily think that that has been the specific problem in group stage for them. So, but I do think it is a problem of the team.
I disagree slightly. I think a problem of them is that as a team, they get very stuck in their ways. For example, I played the Rekkles, right? And I know he's like, I want to play these three champions. And if it doesn't work, he just changes them. He's like, I want to play these three champions now, right? That's how it was back then. And it also seems to be that way about how they play right now. For example, if you notice the games, they're always playing around bot lane. No matter what, they always play around bot. And you see Longzhu, they pick Nasus.
I disagree with that. I mean, at Worlds, yeah, they're playing around that. But I think that that's a symptom of like when they do poorly, they tunnel vision on that. But like, for example, they played around top 4.
But that's what I mean. They drastically pressure one thing, right? They go for one thing only, and else they change it around completely. In the regular season, they were camping top a lot, right? And they changed it around. For what I've seen, for what I've watched. So I think that's a problem, and especially you have to go at every game and look at the champions, and you have to focus on that. Like this is the game you're in, this is the champions you're against. We have to focus on these lanes because of that, and not just because we're good at playing around bottom, or we're good at playing around top, or we're good at playing around mid, or wherever they're good at. And I think that's a massive problem. For example, when you play against Nasus, you can't let a Nasus farm for free and just get 130 CS in 13 minutes. It's a death.
So here's the question. Then, wait, yeah, go on.
I was just going to say that was kind of my point. Is that he's bad at identifying when the lanes are strong and when he can pressure them, and when he can pressure those advantages.
I think that's team decision, bro.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a team decision. I don't think that's necessarily Broxah's fault, right? Because as I said earlier, I think that's the whole team. But like, we win bot lane. We're just gonna go bot no matter what, and that's just the playbook, right? And that's the only thing I've seen them do at this wall. And I don't think it's the jungler's decision, because you start the level 1, you decide where you're going to play around at level 1 already. You're already knowing what your game plan is the second you start the level 1.
Yeah, and that's why I said that I think it could be in part because like the rookies, like you said, don't have a strong leader figure, is because the biggest opening that I see is that they almost never pressure strong mid advantages. And so for me, it could just be that like they don't trust Broxah and Caps in particular to necessarily know what they're doing when they have advantaged lanes. So again, it's like more, I'm basically agreeing with you, yeah.
Well, one thing that's actually very interesting about all of that is I played in a team with Caps, right? And then I played with a team with Caps. Caps is the kind of guy who was shouting really loud, talking a lot, communicating a lot, wanting to play around mid all the time. I don't know if you guys know, but he used to play Radiant Soul, got really high up on the ladder and everything.
Yes.
He wanted to always play around mid, go into the enemy jungle, roam around, make plays. So them not playing around mid is actually weird to me. And I don't think that the problem is him being a rookie or anything. I think it's just a team problem. Because I know for a fact Caps can't shot call. He can do it, and he's been doing it for a long time. Then I played with him, which was for whole split.
See, the funny thing there is, actually, when Amazing did his AMA recently, and he was talking about when he'd played with Caps, but obviously in the spring, he made it sound like one thing that irritated him was that the team just catered to Caps, basically. And actually, they would even do it like, just tell Amazing, like, you're going to do this for him this game. Even though Amazing wanted it to be like, well, I'm the jungler, I get to kind of have some say in that, you know. So it's interesting if they've gone away from that approach. And is that what you've heard, Kelsey?
I mean, part of it, I think, also was that when Miko the Pico came in, like, he had this idea that we have to cater toward Caps to an extent. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff associated with Miko the Pico that I don't want to really necessarily get into. But I think that part of that maybe went away when he went away. And I think it's pretty clear at this point that, to an extent, the team kind of is trying to cater toward Rekkles and just try to keep him on board, either because there were some issues with him joining Scrim Talks that they made somewhat public. They said, like, for example, pre-Rift Rivals, that like Rekkles insisted that he was going to play this one way, but he wasn't necessarily as engaged or as involved in team discussions or making these types of decisions. And then post-Rift Rivals, he even went home for a bit, and they had to wait until he came back to talk to him and say, okay, things have to change. So I think to an extent now it seems like they're trying to or having to cater to Rekkles at this point.
Okay.
I think one really important thing to ask is who's actually the leader figure in Fnatic? Because from all the posts and things I've seen from Rekkles, it sounds like he is trying to take up the leader figure thing. I think he even said that emphasized, like, I'll take up the leadership. I'm trying really hard to do that. But at the same time, it sounds like he's disconnected from the team and he's not really there.
Sure. Okay, I've got a question for you then, Wickd. So, when... I'm trying to think where we were going with that. Okay, when you actually played with Broxah, do you get a different perspective on him from what I outlined before? Where, like, for most people, thought that basically people just didn't pressure him enough in the season, and that if people had done that, he'd have had these problems beforehand. What was he actually like from what you know of him as a player?
I think from what I know about him as a player, the main problem with Broxah, he's very good, he's very smart, he's a good jungler, he got good mechanics and everything, but he's very nervous. He gets very nervous easily. Which can also be seen by the fact that he almost loses all Baron fights, all Dragon fights. He's really bad at smiting because he gets nervous in those situations. So I do think that there's a high chance he'll play bad. And that's also something I talked about in some of my videos, because there's a high chance he'll play bad because he's a very nervous guy who the nerves will hit him and he have a high chance of choking.
Okay. Oh, I remember the question I wanted to ask actually now. When you were talking before about the Nasus, so obviously when Longzhu played against Fnatic, Soaz, in theory, was one of the best players on Fnatic throughout the whole regular split. And coming into this group, you would hope, with a bunch of strong top laners, like he's going to be someone who at least can do decently, right? What would be the appropriate way to play against the Nasus there if that just gets picked out of nowhere and you don't expect it? Like, what do you think Fnatic could have done to shut it down?
I think like Fnatic's in a bad situation, right? Because Havs is running a Maokai. It's going to be hard to shut down the Nasus, but they still have to play around top. And the Soaz have to be in a position where he can play aggressive. Like, Maokai is not the most aggressive champion, but he can still play aggressive and give up CS to deny CS as well. So you kind of deny the Nasus to get the stacks.
So you play a war of attrition, right? You're not going to get as much farm yourself, but you just make sure he doesn't get too much farm and get out of control.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you just deny him farm by taking some of your farm away as well, and then try to maybe kill him and see if he can get some lucky kills on him, right?
Okay.
I think there were a couple of things that went wrong that game also, because like initially at the start they do the invade on top side, and then they back out and they try to go back to their own jungle, but they know that the enemy team went into their jungle, and so they are forced, but they make this mistake and they're forced to burn some flashes, like mid burns flash. If I recall correctly, jungle also had to burn flash, so it's really hard to pressure topside and get scuttle control or anything like this at this point. And then even though Syndra can theoretically at that point push out against the Galio, like super early levels, like he can't. So I think that was a big problem with them doing that. Alternatively, I think Fnatic had a lot of opportunities to swap in that game, with the bot lane going top and pressure against the Nasus in that sense. Like, that could have been another solution that they could have made, even if they lost. I don't remember the bot lane matchup, but even if they lost tempo and traded the turret, I think it would have been worth it because it's Nasus. So
wait a minute, Kelsey. Explain
there were
this
a couple
to me,
of solutions.
So obviously, most people don't ever do lane swaps now, and in the rare occasions they do, sometimes they go really badly. Like, why would it have been appropriate here to try a lane swap?
I think it's still really common to do lane swaps like post 6 minutes, right? So if you push out the lane bottom, like you do the 2v2, once the extra resistance on the top and mid turrets go away, you can push out the bot 2v2, and then you can set your duo lane top on tempo advantage. If you set up the wave properly, then it's fine. You can actually get ahead in the turret trade in that sense if you play that correctly. In this case, like, you can pressure the Nasus. I think here they did end up doing it, but it was really kind of late. And they didn't necessarily keep this side of the map pressured. Like, I think after you take the first tier turret, you have to get Rift Herald, you have to go mid and set it up so that you can keep pressure on these two lanes at least, because if you were just continuously pressuring top, you can easily get ganked, obviously. So I think that there were opportunities for them to do it this way, but they didn't do it. Maybe it's because they wanted to keep pressuring like this 2v2 advantage, and that was their mindset, but I think it was a mistake.
Okay.
I think
what do you actually think of how they've used Soaz in this group? Because it does seem like every game he's either on champions he doesn't clearly want to play and thinks he has to for the team, or he's just left on an island and he just gets fucked, basically. Like, what is this approach? Would it have worked if they, for example, they had just played through mid like you said, and they could have still just left him as he was?
I think there's two things to do, right? So like, I'll talk about both. So I think the picks are fine. Soaz can play tanks. He's a good player, and I think it's fine if he plays tanks. No problem with that. I think what they should have done, they invaded top. They forced Nasus to flash, I believe, as well. I believe he flashed. Then they could have stayed in the top jungle, taken the enemy red, had the pressure top side instead, and then just had a normal 2v2 bottom, no problems there, and then pressure the Nasus. Get him an early base so he doesn't get a sheen on the first back. Try to pressure the tower as much as possible and just dominate him. Because they had the option of doing that. They had the pressure in the top side jungle. They had everything they wanted to play top side. But the problem with Fnatic is the tunnel vision so hard on one playstyle, one specific thing. So like, they have to play on bottom. So they get the jungle vision top or control, and then they back off, go into their own jungle, get fucked. And now they're just in a terrible situation. They can't really do anything at this point because they burned a lot of health mid lane, I think. They were extremely weak everywhere. They got late to lanes, and Nasus could do whatever he wanted because the jungler could never go top at that point.
Okay.
Yes.
Right, so I think that's enough about Fnatic for now. They have lost all the fucking games. So I actually want to just... A topic I thought we could talk about quickly was Gigabyte Marines, actually, because obviously they even came into the tournament. This is what Nelson told us on the pre-World show where we did the predictions. They've basically told everyone who cares to listen that they were going to do all these crazy cheeses and all these ridiculous strategies because they kind of... I mean, fair play to them. They know they're not just going to win if they just play a default game. So obviously, the first game, they tried this crazy shit. It was pretty nuts, right? What did you think of that? That was obviously the nightmare scenario for Fnatic, right? This game where they just... Like, how do you explain what they did in that cheese Wicked? How does that work?
I think basically it's the strategy that doesn't really work unless your opponent doesn't expect it at all. And the problem is, Fnatic have 2 rookies, they're not that used to lane swaps and everything, and they got caught completely off guard. They're like, how do you do this? They tried to react to it, but they didn't react properly. And then when you don't know how to react in a lane swap, you mostly get fucked. Like, I played a lot of lane swaps myself, and I think it took us about 50 lane swaps till we actually started getting it right. So if you're new to the lane swap scenario, it's going to be very difficult to get right, and the other team will always have a massive advantage over you. And I'm personally hate lane swaps in this meta. I think it's really bad. I don't think it's ever good. But they found a really good strategy to get Nocturne super far ahead really quickly, and it seemed to work out really well and caught Fnatic off guard. And that could also have tilted them.
Yeah. Were they unlucky, Kelsey? Like, was that an example of where they did lots of things wrong, or did a couple of things just go wrong early and you just couldn't have recovered from that? Like, if they'd have had some amazing shot caller, could they have done something?
I think in the Gigabyte Marine games, it was just a long series of actions. It wasn't just the first reaction. Like, initially, of course, Fnatic, first of all, should have known that Gigabyte Marines are going to lane swap because they've done it before. They've done it at MSI. They've done it just in general. And Fnatic themselves have also tried this strategy in spring. Like, they did this type of lane swap strategy as well in the spring playoffs. So to me, like, this should have been the team that was best suited to face the Gigabyte Marines lane swap first in this group. And then on top of that, they had like poor... where they did a 5-man dive bot that didn't work well. They could have instead had pressure mid and used Broxa as a lease to have threat mid against the Kassadin. They could have also, and then from that, instead of pushing out the wave and then swapping top to match, like once the dive failed, they kept trying to force bot and lost turrets for this. So it was like a continuous, and then Soaz was like constantly out of position in these setups, so Gigabyte Marines could get a pick on Soaz. So I think it was just, like, it wasn't just one mistake. It was just continuously making mistakes and continuously reacting poorly to the situation the entire game.
Okay. So Wicked, obviously, Gigabyte Marines, they did make good on their promise. They did try mad cheeses against everyone else as well. But, like, is this how it should go? Should all the cheeses fail in theory against these teams like Longzhu and Immortals? Like, do you think Gigabyte Marines will win any more games?
I think they could win games if they come up with a new cheese, like, for sure. Like, for example, the Fnatic one, they caught Fnatic off guard, and the second you caught off guard and you make the first mistake, you're more likely to make the next mistake and so on. Because you're still in a mindset where you're like, we need to do something. Something's happening. What am I doing? I'm not used to this, right? Because you practice League of Legends so much. As a pro player, you play all the time. You probably practice 8 to 10 hours a day. So you're so used to every single situation, and something catches you completely off guard. You sometimes just bang, you're like, whoa, what do I do now? Like, it happened to me as well when I play pro sometimes. And I think that's the biggest problem. And then you're in that mindset, you have to reset somehow. You need somebody to reset the mindset of the team during the game, and that's very difficult to do.
Okay. So what do you actually think about the performance of Immortals thus far? Like, Wicked, do you watch any LCS much?
I was in LCS, yeah.
Okay. So what have you thought about Immortals at Worlds then? Because they're another team, right, where there's a couple of players here. In theory, like no one knows what Cody's son was going to be like at his first Worlds. You know, they had a rookie there. I mean, not really technically a rookie, but for me, it's a rookie if you haven't played at the top level before. What do you think of Immortals at Worlds thus far?
I think they've been fine, but they haven't really been dominant, right? Like, if you look at the game versus Fnatic, they were somewhat even the whole game. I would even say Fnatic was ahead because they had the better late game. They had double Fire Dragon with Twitch, which is very scary until Rekkles died. But I don't think they're that much better than Fnatic. If you look at the games, it's kind of close. Fnatic just got really hard by Gigabyte Marines, and then they had a terrible showing against Longzhu because Longzhu is really good, and they just don't know how to play against top pressure right now. But I think Fnatic and Immortals are somewhat similar in the skill level if they play over like 10 games or so against only each other. The problem was just Fnatic didn't know how to adapt to other teams, and Immortals also didn't abuse Fnatic's weakness that hard, which they might do in the next games.
Okay, what do you think, Kelsey?
I think that to an extent, Fnatic kind of misplayed their setup in terms of insisting on sidelining the Twitch, because they could have used, like, for example, in the G2 or RNG series, you see how they use Twitch was in general like pushing out and then using the threat of Twitch to make sure the enemy team can't really collapse mid or group mid. And then on top of that, they had a Rise. So I think that there was some obvious mis-execution, and there were things that Immortals did a lot better in that part. But at the same time, Fnatic were able to match them just because of how well they executed their side trade early on and things of that nature. So I think that it's good. Then unfortunately, they didn't really have anything that matched Kog'Maw's range or something that was really able to get into the backline of Immortals' composition well. So it was really difficult for them to close out. So I agree with him that they definitely had a good ability to match Immortals in skill level that game. But there were just a few things that they did worse that ended up costing them. So like it's a really sad kind of setup because Gigabyte Marines, they reacted poorly to a situation. Like whether or not they should have been prepared for that is something you can debate. Longzhu is a team that is really good and really used to pressuring the first advantage they get. And when you make a couple of early mistakes the way Fnatic did, it just went really poorly for them. But Immortals, that was a game that was definitely winnable for them. And so it's a little bit unfortunate that this ended up being their situation so far.
Okay. So one of the topics that this group especially showed to me, because it has so many of the good top liners in it, was on the first couple of days, Wickd, everyone was talking about all these Cho'gath picks, because in the first 3 games or something, Cho'gath won every game, but those were also the games where, if you look, people tended to just sort of let the Cho'gath do kind of whatever it wanted. But then you had the game where, I'm trying to think, well, obviously Soaz picked Cho'gath in South, but Flame just went a Jace straight into it. Now, do you think, was Cho'gath just being used early on and people have figured it out now? If someone does pick a Cho'gath, do you have to kind of try and bully it in the lane before and not just let it power up? What's your take on it?
Cho'gath is obviously a strong pick. I don't think you necessarily have to gank him and play around him, destroy him. I think you can be fine regardless. There's strong champions like Marka as well. In the Flame scenario that you pull up, that's a Jace lane, right? Jace lane will always win if you have more jungle pressure. And again, obviously, Bjergsen is not going to be top because it's Fnatic, so Source was just left alone. I actually watched this whole thing because I felt so sad for Source. Yeah. And I feel like this every time I play solo queue, my junglist doesn't come top and I'm playing against the Jace. I just want to LF4 because you can't do anything, especially if the enemy jungler is coming top as well. You're just going to die. You don't have a chance. You're going to get dove. And there's legit nothing he can ever do. There's nothing Sword can do in that matchup. He couldn't even have played it better. I think he was full health and he got dove. And it's just an unfair scenario for him. But I do think if you put jungle pressure towards top, you can play against Jace. You will be fine. And I don't think it's that big of a problem.
Okay. What do you think, Kelsey? Because, I mean, in this game, Fnatic actually did... I believe they even banned out, the Renekton and the Jarvan. So, obviously, in theory, they didn't really want Flame, presumably, to be on any kind of a carry.
I think in this case, I don't necessarily agree that they had to pressure topside because Cho'gath will still scale up to an extent fine and still be able to do the Cho'gath situation. I think in this situation, it's really hard to play against Jace. There are opportunities to take advantage of Jace pushing because Jace will almost all have the push. But at the same time, if you do have advantage bot, you are probably better off to just trade sides in this case. And I think that it wasn't really a situation that ended up favoring one side drastically over the other in the side trade. I think that actually it's almost better to play around bot generally right now in this meta because obviously if you get Ardent first, you can snowball really, really hard from there. You can get first turret, you can go top, you can get first Herald. So I think that this is... I don't necessarily disagree with how they played it early. But I agree it's really, really difficult from Soaz's perspective to sort of deal with the Jace.
For me, I think the main difference, though, is that bot lane actually have a chance to thin out the waves to make sure it doesn't happen so there's a massive stacked up wave on the third wave where they get dove. But Soaz doesn't have a chance to do anything. He's 100% dead no matter what. Your bot lane actually could have prevented it to some extent. And they had chances, they had things to do and options. And Soaz is just dead no matter what, right? So I think Immortals wins, or Fnatic wins out by killing Immortals bot lane. I agree on that. But it's a more risky play because it's not 100% secure.
What do you think about when Longzhu played Immortals? Because, I mean, when you consider Immortals, no one considers them a team that's got a chance to go super deep. Longzhu is actually a potential favourite for the tournament. I thought it was fairly competitive as a game, you know? Like, Khan didn't just bulldoze at the top lane. It seemed like they were in the game for most of it. I mean, we've seen a lot of perfect games at this Worlds, Kelsey. What did you actually think of this matchup? Like, was Longzhu just not at peak form? What did you think?
The Longzhu Immortals game, it was a little bit uncharacteristic, I think, for Longzhu, because I don't think they reacted that well to the fact that Immortals had one very obvious lane that they could pressure in the setup, because I think their top and mid were low pressure lanes. And they had an Ezreal, so very obviously, like, they're going to look to make plays on that side. And then I just don't think that Longzhu's bot lane reacted very well to it. However, as the game extended and the game continued, I think that Longzhu would continue to have a lot of options. As long as Prey and Gorilla could eventually get pressure mid and they kept pushing out sides, then eventually, like, Longzhu had a more favorable composition and a more favorable situation for in mid to late anyway. So I think that was kind of their thought process going forward, but I do think that to an extent they misplayed early because they didn't necessarily trade sides well, and bot lane didn't react to the pressure that Immortals were going to very obviously generate early on.
Okay. Wickd, Immortals, actually, one of the things people often credit them for is, like, good early game, you know? Was this just, like, a fine matchup for Longzhu? Does it worry you at all in terms of how they do in the rest of the worlds? Are they still a favourite for you?
Longzhu is still a favorite for me. Like, you also have to think about it in different ways, right? Like, Khan is the star player. He's playing Jarvan versus Maokai. There's not much to do there. They go up and fist each other a couple of times and hit each other, but nothing really happens, right? So he can't do anything up there.
Sure.
So you already have your star player out of the picture of carrying, and he can only try to make map plays. And after that, snowballing is pretty difficult, especially then against an Ezreal like Immortals had. So I think they did fine. They went even for the majority of part, and then suddenly they started taking over.
Okay. So, a group that I think is probably, in my opinion, the weirdest group has to be Group A, because, right, yes, SK Telecom has done well, everything's gone, but even SK Telecom had times in this group where it didn't look that good. Like when they played against EDG, Kelsey, initially EDG was fucking winning that game a lot of the time. And in fact, EDG's the team obviously that's lost all their games, but in a first couple of games they lost, they had pretty good early games. It seemed like they kind of had a good strategy going in. What's your take on this group, Kelsey?
I don't think that Edward Gaming are going to be able to replicate what they did, because they have to have specific picks to be successful, and they put a lot of pressure on Scout to get ahead, which is why I think they forced him into
why
and
did
the
they
team
make
into
him play Lucian every
situations.
time, by the way? What is the logic on that?
I think that they have a very, the style in which Edward Gaming play, I think they have limited champions that they can put Scout on to be successful. And those are like Lucian and LeBlanc, so really aggressive mid laners that will also have high mobility and be able to move around. They put him in these situations where he has to fall really, really hard and have a lot of pressure, I think, because to an extent their side lanes are really, really unreliable. And so Edward Gaming almost feel like they have to play this way. And people have even said, if Scout doesn't get ahead, then the team will fail. They have referred to him as their double-edged sword in a way. And I mean, I was talking to Divisio a little bit before these games started, and it was Scout is a super risky player, and this is just the way that Edward Gaming plays. So they feel like they have to have these Lucians and these LeBlancs, or they can't get the pressure they need, and they can't have successful games. Okay.
What do you think actually of the performance of iBoy, the AD carry of Edward Gaming?
I think iBoy has done better than I expected him to do, but at the same time, I think he's I actually don't think he was necessarily the biggest reason that they're losing or anything like that, but he's still a really young player. He played, I think, 20 something stage games before the tournament started, and he just turned 17, so he's not someone that they're going to realistically rely a lot on, which is difficult for them to process exactly.
Wickd, do you actually, obviously, Like, I would assume you don't watch that much LPL. Edward Gaming were the champions of the LPL. Have they looked good? Have they looked bad? What's your take on them so far in Group A?
So I don't think they look that good. Mostly I focus on top laners because I'm top laner myself. And I actually watched Mars in solo queue in Korea when he was there. Okay. And I watched his play and I thought his laning was really bad. Like, he didn't have a good laning phase. And it also showed from what I could see in the games, because what I see, he plays Shen against Cho'gath and he's going kind of even. And then he plays Cho'gath against Shen and he goes really far behind in the CS, right? So it shows that he's a weak laner and he's having problems in that aspect. And that's obviously detrimental to the team, right? And I think that's a problem for them. Then regarding the Korean teams, then they got really far ahead of SKT. I don't think that's a wrong thing for SKT at all. And I don't think that's a great thing for EDG either, because I have the feeling that almost every team can get ahead early against another team. It's not the early game that matters. It's the mid and late game that matters. And it's always the mid and late game where Koreans are superior, right? Because for me, I don't think Koreans are superior individually as players. I think they're superior as a team to all the other regions.
Okay. Kelsey, how does this happen every year, where EDG does so well in LPL, and yet Mouse comes to Worlds and everyone thinks he's a joke? Like, why doesn't he get exploited in LPL?
So I've said that I think Chinese teams in general aren't very good at playing to topside or pressuring top advantages. And last year I was really apprehensive about Mouse because I think the reason why Edward Gaming dropped games to bottom tier teams in the LPL, so because obviously they didn't lose series, was because bottom tier teams were the ones with the good top laners, coincidentally, just because LPL as a region has difficulty playing to topside. And so when they have topside carries, these teams tended to not do well. So I think that was a big sign that Mouse was going to be a problem. And I didn't anticipate like how much of a problem he was going to be last year, but he again is like an issue. Also, this is a group with good top laners, right? Like, there aren't a ton of good top laners at Worlds, but this group definitely has good top laners.
Sure, they have a few, yeah. Okay, so Kelsey, in general, just obviously broad strokes, as you've mentioned there are obviously like teams that have Flandre, etc., players that have very good top laners. Does China still just try to run it through bot lane or something? Are they still like AD carry centric?
I would say actually the LPL meta this season has been much more about support mid. So using like support to get advantage in bot lane and then roam mid and try to really pressure mid lane hard. I think that's what RNG were doing. That's kind of the gist of VDG's strategy. WE is definitely a team that plays to bot side, of course, but I think that there are a lot more teams that play with like mid support synergy in LPL than not. Okay.
So the most shocking team in this group, Wickd, I realise actually a lot of experts did think they had a chance to get out over Edward Gaming, is Cloud9 was a team that no one even knew if they'd be at Worlds. They had to come through the gauntlet selecting, but they beat Edward Gaming here. They look like they might be able to make it to the round of 8. What do you make of them?
So I think it's more of a situation of Edward Gaming being much worse than everybody expected, right? Because personally, they had to SKT first, Edward second, then Cloud9, and then HQ. And I think it's just the way everybody expected, apart from Edward Gaming playing much worse, right? Cloud9 seems to be a solid team. Americans' team seems to actually be really solid now after there's been more money in the scene and the infrastructure is much better, more coaching staff, more everything. So they seem to be solid in comparison to Europe, where Europe was kind of just stagnated and never improved, right? For the last 2 seasons, I think, or 2 years. So I think Cloud9 have a good shot. I think they can get pretty far as well. I think all the Indian teams will do well.
Okay.
I just hope at least one European team gets out of the group.
Kelsey, has there actually been any improvement for Cloud9 from the one that had such a terrible playoffs in LCS to the team that might now get out of the group?
I actually think so. I think that Cloud9 had hiccups in playoffs and the gauntlet, and when I was doing interviews, they said that they thought that they were way too cocky going into playoffs. But when I saw them in play-in, for example, they played a lot more like they did in regular season, which was, so they still have problems with, like, I guess when they play to one lane, the other lanes don't respond very well. I don't necessarily think bot lane has the best laning, things of that nature, so they will sometimes fall behind early, but I still think in general, like Cloud9, when it comes down to it, I picked Cloud9 to get out of the group over EDG because I believe that at the crux, like this meta has a lot of team fighting influence, and I think Cloud9 is like overall a better team fighting team than EDG. So I think that they made some improvements over playoffs, but not necessarily over how they were in regular season. And I'm not that surprised that they are beating Edward Gaming, for example.
So in this group, it's hard to really know how much you can take away from SK Telecom, because first of all, they have won all their games, and then secondly, there weren't really teams, if you look at the makeup of the teams, who were really going to exploit their top and jungle, which were the only players who kind of have been criticized recently. What do you actually think? Does this still? What do you think of SK Telecom so far, Wickd?
I think SKT is good. As I said, like, I think it's more about the mid late game. The only thing I really put a question mark is, why is Huni at Walls instead of Nuntara? Because I watched both the solo queues. I watched both of them a lot. I like Nuntara a lot. I watched him through the whole season. And he's probably my favorite Korean top laner right now, even over Khan. I don't think he's better than Khan, but I like him more. And I don't understand why Huni got to take this spot. I just assume that they know better than me because they obviously have coaching staff and know all the things. Sure. And I don't have all the information. But from what I saw in solo queue and what I saw in the season, Nuntara just seemed to perform better.
Wasn't it something mental, Kelsey? Like, maybe I'm misremembering, but wasn't it something totally stupid? Like, they had some sort of internal competition that you had to get a certain solo queue placing with a certain champion or something. Wasn't it something nuts like that as to why they took them? Do you remember that detail?
I don't remember anything about that, but when they said that they were taking Huni, it made some sense to me, because I think relative to Untara, how Huni plays is that he will almost always try to get pressure in his lane. Whereas I don't necessarily think Untara will do that as much. And they didn't. We're having some difficulty with bot lane, consistently getting ahead or consistently pushing out, even in winning matchups. So I think that that's probably why that's why I rationalized them going with Huni over Untara.
Okay, and the logic is that it relieves pressure on the bot lane. So you're going to have to deal with Huni.
Yeah, and they can play to topside to an extent with Huni. Like, they can have jungle to top, and bot can just like play safe and scale for team fights.
Okay.
It seemed to make sense to me as a logic for why they would take Huni. Obviously, I have no idea why. And maybe you saw some statement about an internal competition, but
maybe I'm misremembering that. But I'm sure I saw something in an interview. Okay, what about this then, Kelsey? Does the EDG game, the first part of it, concern you at all? For
SKT?
Yeah.
No, I think it makes sense that, like, obviously Longzhu was a team that beat SK Telecom by getting ahead early and executing like the setup and having good vision so that they could continue having like these split pushing compositions that no other team has been like consistent in executing. So I think that an early game sort of style has always been kind of the way to play against SKT, and if you can carry out like lane assignments from a successful early game really well, then you can beat SK Telecom. So it's unsurprising that teams would win an early game against them even that hard, and that SKT could come back because they very often like set up and come back well from that, and Edward Gaming just like don't have the good grasp of mid lane vision to be able to close on that. So it's not that unexpected. Even in the AHQ game, which I actually think should be more disconcerting, SKT just kept really good control of side lane waves, and like it was almost like AHQ forgot that side lanes existed for picks over and over again, and SKT just like really outclassed them in their ability to transition and to keep like the waves pushing so that HQ couldn't get that much off of it, and AHQ couldn't close the game. So
okay.
But also, regarding the SKT vs EDG game, it's also important to remember how they got ahead. They got ahead by Rekkles during all the camps on the bot side, like starting Red, Golems, and then Raptors, I believe it was. And then they ganked mid, where Faker obviously expected the gank to be coming from the top side. So he's staying on the wrong side of the map because it's an unusual path. So I think that's also important to note, that Faker actually got caught off by, not cheese, but it was a nice strategy, right? And that got them really far.
I also think that that's not that atypical. Like Faker will play far forward in lane, or will play to a risky side, or might not anticipate early path. And teams have gotten like first blood against him for that. the important thing is that Faker can continue to like exert this pressure without necessarily losing his turret super early on. And I think that says a lot about him as a player, and that's why also part of why SKT can be successful. So.
Okay.
So over in Group D, this is the one where there was all this potential for upsets because, I mean, the teams are all fairly close in general, even though most people had TSM coming out first. And as expected, there have been a bunch of differing results. Like Misfits managed to beat TSM, but TSM beat World Elite. You know, it's still all over the place. I mean, technically they're called Team WE now. I'm not allowed to call them World Elite, but I still call them World Elite. So here's the question. In this group, we had this game. Let's start actually with the TSM WE one, right? Kelsey, you weren't really up on WE anyway. Did this game actually have some of the seeds of why you didn't believe in WE?
I think for me, it's a little bit difficult to anticipate how WE will draft in games because they're a little bit inconsistent in how they want to play. Like they can play a bunch of different styles, and so I think that sometimes hurts them a little bit. So to me, like I felt these teams were pretty close, and it would come down to who drafted, and neither of them have really, really solid, strong early games. So it would come down to who drafted the better team fighting comp. And so when you saw the draft, like it seemed like TSM would win. Also, I think that Team Solo Mid tends to do much better on blue side for various reasons. But that I won't necessarily get into right now, but they tend to do better on blue side, and this was their only blue side game of the week. So, yeah.
Why did they not put Shia on Corki? Like, he only has a few champions that he's known for like being really good on. Instead, they actually just let Bjergsen take it. Like, they just basically let him. Obviously, it wasn't banned, and then they didn't pick it. Did they just not ever first pick mid lane or something? I think you've died with that.
I mean, I don't.
Keep going.
I don't necessarily know why they didn't pick Corki. I don't even think that that's necessarily his best style of playing. I think he's better on like Talia's and Galio's. That obviously Corki is in a similar vein where if you get priority, you can then roam to sidelines, and he's much happier doing that sort of thing. I think Syndra was kind of a really difficult pick to play into TSM's comp because of how much engage and pick they had, and Syndra's general lack of mobility, but I'm not really sure. I don't remember the draft specifically at this point, so maybe Wickd does.
Right, Wickd, do you actually think WE look any good from these games?
I don't think they look bad. I think all those three teams look equal to me, like Misfits, TSM, and WE. And I also rated them kind of equal myself. Then I was looking at the things because all of them are good. All of them have different strengths and so on. The biggest thing I'll put to this game that we were watching was they had a Shen and they didn't actually manage to make plays with the Shen. I think they made one play with him, and that's it in 20 minutes, which you can't have a Shen versus a Cho'gath if you don't make plays because Cho'gath will obviously outscale eventually. So you need to get a lead somewhere, or you need to have more aggressive champions if you want to play Shen, in my opinion.
Okay. Right, I saw a video on your channel, Wickd, where you like critiqued a game that Haunter played in Korean solo queue. And in this game, you seemed pretty critical of him, actually. You seemed like you thought he messed up some of the laning, etc., or when to take fights and how to be aggressive. Right, in Worlds itself, his stats at the moment are very good in this group, even despite the loss they've had. What is your actual take on Haunter as a top laner? So
for me, in NA, I have two top laners I like. I like Darshan and I like Haunter. I think he's a very good top laner. I think his laning phase is slightly weak. I think his team fights are phenomenal. And I think his TPs are very good as well, right? So everything that a top laner needs right now, he's good at. The only thing he got a weak laning phase is not that important because people don't have carry tops right now. They don't really play carry tops that much unless you're Khan and you play Jason, you win alone. So I think he got the qualities he needs to be a top laner in this meta right now. Also, I think he's been doing well. He's had a lot of pressure in the lane. For example, in this game, he had pressure. Him and Svenskeren invaded into the jungle constantly. I think they invaded as early as level 3 or 4. And then took the Raptors or something and tried to kill the enemy jungler. So they had a lot of pressure and they're doing a lot of work there.
Do you think TSM wins this group?
I think all the three teams are equal, to be honest. I think they're all even. They have different strengths and weaknesses in their players. Some players are weaker on different teams. For example, I think Alfari is the best top laner in this group.
Wait a minute, why?
I think Alfari is the best top laner in this group because I think he is individually the strongest one. I think individually Bjergsen is the strongest mid laner. So it all depends on the players, right? And all depends if they get the people ahead that they need to be ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, it's. I think the thing with Hunter in this group to keep in mind also is that when they TSM play red side, because of the way pick and ban go on red side, they get strong top lane matchup. So they haven't like TSM's way of playing to top side, especially against Shen, is to try to bait out the TP when they're on bot, so that they don't necessarily give up blue side to the stronger bot laner. So I think that's also part of why Svenskeren got caught. In the WE game, Hunter managed to get a lot of pressure off of that, actually. So I think that actually ended up winning them the game in part, going back to the Shen pick. So I think Hunter has played the game pretty well. It's just that TSM play kind of like counterintuitively from red side sometimes. So I think going into second week, I feel much better about them because they have 2 blue side games out of 3. So I think that their difficult games against Misfits and Flash Rolls will be easier because they'll probably draft stronger bottom lane. They'll probably play to bottom lane, which they're much more comfortable with. Deny enemy blue buff, etc. So I feel pretty good about them still getting out of this group in first. Yeah.
When you say that, though, you say they'll play to the bot lane.
Yeah.
Wasn't that one of their problems in the Misfits game? Like, Misfits seemed like they out-macroed them most of the time. Like, the 1v1 was pretty good. And Doublelift was obviously the main person who drew all the criticism. What did you think of the Misfits upset?
So I think in the Misfits scenario, first of all, Misfits played the early game really well, despite the fact that TSM should have had strong priority in multiple lanes. Maxlor was able to take advantage of, I think, a better bot back timing from the bot lane and dive bot. And then, of course, when TSM tried to execute the play to bait out the Shen, they didn't have pressure on top side, so there's nothing Hauser could really get off of it. And so Misfits had a much better setup playing to bot side that game. Also, I think in general, their mid-game execution wasn't as sharp, but in late, they, for example, set up Baron really well. There was a scenario where Alfari was pushing out the wave, and they ended up trapping Hunter between mid and bot because he kept having to answer the wave, and then they set up for flank and transitioned into Baron. So I think that Misfits actually played late game surprisingly well, but TSM only really had the opportunity to kind of contest them because they fumbled some of their execution in mid game. And I think that if TSM get a stronger early game setup by playing to bot side against them, then it probably is still TSM favored the matchup generally.
Okay. Wickd, was this actually a match where it's more credit to Misfits, great play, or did TSM fuck it up? What do you think?
But I think a lot of this is about the top lane matchup. I believe Hunter pulled early, and Alfaro was winning the matchup. Which I think
Hunter was on Renekton, by the way.
Hunter was on Renekton, and Alfaro was on Shen, right? Yes. So Hunter, I believe he pulled the red, and then Alfaro was allowed to push in the lane, have pressure in the lane, and be able to do whatever he wanted, basically, which gives him pressure in the top lane. And then they could have Maxlor play around the bottom lane, and Hansama was just free to do whatever he wanted. So they were winning the bottom lane, had the pressure down there. They played kind of aggressive all the time, right? It was just beating up Doublelift. And I think that's a massive point because they actually gave Alfari the advantage top, and Alfari was winning the matchup, which he shouldn't be winning. And I think a lot of that came down to the red pull, or perhaps Alfari being better. I can't tell because that's hard to tell, right? But one of them definitely for the laning phase.
Okay. Do you have any comment on that, Kelsey? Sounded like you were getting ready to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, like I said, being able to play to bot side is really important in this setup, and Misfits have put a lot of priority on it. So I think that if TSM have a better setup where they pick strong bot, and then which they tend to do on blue, then they'll do better. Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Kelsey. Okay, so last week or whenever we did that episode, we already ruffled all the mentally ill TSM fans by daring to suggest that because Bjergsen almost never carries in Worlds games, maybe he's not as amazing as people thought. Well, this week, the version of that I want to ask you about is this, right? So I've now seen Doublelift playing a whole bunch of worlds, and in every world, it's the same story. He comes in, a really good player, one of the best in his region. He gets matched up, often against players, by the way, who aren't always studs. Like, he's not against Uzi every time, you know. Sometimes he's playing against, like, Hans Sama, who's a good AD carry, he's certainly not some world beater. And yet what tends to happen every time is all the mistakes Doublelift makes are, like, things where I can't buy the idea they're one-offs. So, for example, when he did play against RNG last year, he just like constantly acted as though Alistair isn't a champion that can engage on an AD carry and just stayed in the danger range all day long against like a world-class support. In this game here, he just refused to ever flash on a Cogmore. Like, these aren't actually like one-off mistakes. This is how this person thinks he wants to play the game, and he just like, put it this way, everyone in the LPL has no problem going deep on fucking Uzi every time he mispositions or plays overly cocky, you know? Doesn't Doublelift do this pretty routinely now when we've seen him all these worlds, you know? If you add up all the games, we've got a lot where he fucks up not through like a misplay, but through actually not making a play because somehow he doesn't understand he's in danger or that it can go badly. It's bizarre to me. What's your take on it?
I think that's true to an extent. To be fair to him for this game, I think that LeBlanc Shen is probably really difficult for a Cog to play against because you can just go in and then the Shen shield or ult is really difficult to avoid. But I think, yeah, we have seen situations where Doublelift mispositions or he's just not used to it. I think in the Mata scenario, he specifically said that, like, NA supports don't necessarily do that, so he's just not used to playing against someone who pressured that aggressively. So there is probably some truth or some reality to that. I think overall, though, this was probably Doublelift's worst game at the tournament. I think he played pretty well in the WE game, for example, so yeah.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of things to take on it. First of all, I think you're underrating Hansama. He is extremely good. He's been top of the EU ladder for a while. He's one of the best carriers in the EU, I think. And also, you said that Doublelift gets called a lot. And I was watching the game. I noticed that a lot of the time he didn't actually get protection. For example, one of the times he gets caught in the late game is when he's walking. They're in the mid lane. They had lost the inhibitor, and the team is walking in front of him, and he's coming from the base, so he's obviously behind them, right? And they just keep on walking in front of him very far up. And he needs to get to the team, so the only thing he can do is actually walk towards the team. And I think that just shows some communication or the team not really respecting misfits or not protecting Kog'Maw and walking together as a team. It's just a basic thing that should be walking together, right? And it's not necessarily Doublelift's fault, it's everybody's fault at that point. Okay. And also, another thing I want to point out is Maxwell in this game played absolutely out of his mind with his engage. He's had one of the most amazing games I've seen. Like, I rated Maxwell as one of the worst junglers in this tournament. I didn't think he was that good. But watching the games, he's been performing exceptional, I think, in compared to his skill level.
Okay. So you said that you consider Bjergsen the best mid laner in this group, right? Obviously, because people remember that infamous game like 3 years ago or something, where PowerOfEvil was on the Unicorns of Love team that no one really expected much from, and they beat TSM. But it was at a tournament right after Worlds. You know, there was all these factors where you could give excuses. Was the mid lane matchup critical to this game?
I don't think it was critical to this game. I think, like as you said, you're referring to an old game. I don't think it matters that much if you take one serious or something like that. Like, I loved Kaboom as well. I didn't really think I was worse than the top lane at that time than a lot. A lot of it comes down to how you're feeling on that day. And even if it's a best of 3, it's also still about how you're feeling in the whole day. Are you feeling great? Are you happy? Is the team feeling good? And all of those small things add up and decide how you're going to play. So you can't really take one game and be like, this shows anything. You have to take multiple best of 3 series. And I still think Bjergsen is the best one in this group.
Sure.
Yeah. I think that, again, like, it's really difficult to play against Shen as like a Shen LeBlanc combination as well. And you saw Svenskeren get punished by like the Shen jungle setup twice in this group stage. I also feel like Bjergsen in general has played well. He had a lot of pressure in the WE game when he shouldn't necessarily have had pressure in the Corki Cinder matchup. So I feel like Bjergsen has actually had a really good tournament. So
okay, so we saw TSM basically put all their bans into AD carries and mid laners. Would they actually have been better? Like, was the Kog'Maw a perfectly fine pick against this comp that you're saying here? Shouldn't they have just given up some of those picks and gambled that they're going to have to take a stronger AD carry themselves? No? Keep going.
You mean like you think they shouldn't give up Cog? I think Cog is just really, really strong right now. Okay. So if you're playing like a late game team fighting composition, I think Kog'Maw basically wins most of these scenarios. Generally, if as long as you have pressure on one side of the map, I think it's fine. I think also Cog will just scale, so it's also fine. It depends on the support matchup a lot as well. And they actually had a good laning matchup here because they had Nami, and Nami will be a sustain lane, and it's easy to punish. I think Biofrost actually played the early lane really well. He was punishing on when like minions were focused firing the enemy minion, he would be able to punish really well. So I just generally think they had a weird setup in the lane that allowed them to lose priority, where like Doublelift was clearing while Biofrost was trading, which was a little bit strange. But I don't necessarily think the Kog'Maw pick was bad. Is basically the TLDR. Yeah.
Okay. For WE, when they lost to TSM, I noticed most Western fans, because again, they don't watch LPL, were just going in on Mystic, like, look, this guy's supposed to be a good AD carry, he's pure shit. What did you actually think of, like you said, or, you know, that's like one of the bot lane teams in theory. What has Mystic's performance been like at Worlds?
I think Mystic, first of all, their communication, their coordination early is really bad. I think in that game, they tried to camp super hard to bottom lane, like really, really hard, and they couldn't make anything really happen. They kept putting vision and setting up these wards for this. Against Misfits, they tried a similar thing, but Misfits didn't really try to react in any way, so it worked out for them. But in general, like, I don't think of WE as an early game team, so the fact that they picked an earlier game focus comp was a little bit weird. I think the turning point, again, was less to do with Mystic and more to do with the fact that TSM had a really good setup on top side, and Shia got picked off. I'm not really sure. I don't exactly remember why WE were there. I think it was a little awkward for them to be in that position, but TSM had the play set up really well, managed to execute it. Syndra didn't do well into their composition, and then TSM like held the game and snowballed from that position.
Okay. Wickd, what do you actually think of the top laner of WE?
Like, for me, I haven't looked too much into him. I haven't seen him do well. I haven't seen him do bad. I've just seen him be there, right? Like, I haven't really paid much attention to him because there was nothing special from the games I've seen. I don't think I saw 3 games. I saw 2 of the games with him, and there's 1 game I missed.
Okay. Kelsey, is he actually considered a good top laner in LPL?
I think he's considered decent. I wouldn't say he's considered a really, really good top laner, but I think he's generally better when it comes to using globals and teleports, like things that LPL top laners generally get praised for, not necessarily landing. I think he's a little bit limited to, like, he'll play Rumble, Shen. He was really good on Kled, which is why people liked him a lot at MSI, but in general, I don't necessarily think he's a really good top laner. I think he's a decent top laner, I guess.
Okay. Wickd, since we've got a 3-way tie at the moment, which 2 teams make it out in your opinion?
So I'm hoping, obviously, for Misfits to make it out because I think they're the only European team that's really good right now in the groups and have a good chance of coming out. Then TSM, I also think will make it out. But I don't think there's a much big difference between the teams. I just hope those 2 makes it out. I think it's about 33% chance for all of them. They're all around equal. It just depends if they actually play to the win conditions. But for example, in the TSM game, I don't think they played to the win conditions, TSM versus Misfits, because the Ledge can do whatever he wanted, right? Like, I would much rather have them just play around top early game. Nami and Kog'Maw, they can sustain. This should be fine bot lane if they don't make mistakes. And then they can shut down the Shen so you can't TP around the map and have that pressure for free.
Okay. When you said that, like, Misfits is the EU team with like the best chance or something, do you just mean relative to the groups? Because obviously G2's in the Samsung RNG group, or do you actually think Misfits is better than G2?
So I think it depends, right? I think Misfits have better players right now, actually individually, but they're also a newer team. Maxwell stepped up heavily. He's been playing really well. I didn't expect that. Alfari, I think, is better. Hansama, I think, is better as well. And then Igna is fine, and PowerOfEvil is also fine. None of them are bad. Like, the skill on the team is ridiculous, actually. I think it's the strongest skill in Europe. And if they actually had more experience, I think this team would be a strong contender for World. But they lack experience right now, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, then let's just segue that into Group C then, because in Group C, where G2 is, like, when you say that, a lot of people would be shocked if you're going to say that, like, Hans Sama is better than Sven, because actually Sven is a player who almost never gets any criticism. People think this guy's wonderful. He's always one of the best AD carries in Europe. Where has G2 been weak individually?
I think that Sven have fallen off a little bit in comparison to what he used to be. Like, he used to be the absolute best, right? Like, there's no argument about it. But I think Hamsana has developed heavily, and I think there's not much difference between those two. And I might even give Hamsana a small edge. I think Expect is worse than Alfari, for sure. Like, I think Alfari is the best in the West, so that's pretty similar right there. And then I think Maxlow is better than Trick because of the games he's played at Worlds, right?
Okay. Do you think that, like, it's funny, obviously, every time G2 failed initially, everyone used to just blame Perks. But I always noticed that simultaneously, Trick also used to have a lot of very fucking weird international games. What's been the biggest issue in this group? I mean, admittedly, they've got some very good teams, so it's not like you have to be shit to lose the games. But have they had issues individually in this group, do you think?
I think the problem with G2 is that they're kind of predictable, in my opinion. I don't think Expect is the carry potential player. I think they always have to play around Perks or Sven. And I think Sven is more the stable player that plays really well in team fights, always stable, but he doesn't go absolutely maniac crazy from that many games, in my opinion, where I think they often play around Perks.
Okay.
So Kelsey, Perks is the main carry, and then they go Perks is the main carry, and then they go towards the bottom second carry most of the time. And I think they're predictable in their play because of that.
Okay. Kelsey, what's G2's issues been? Why haven't they been able to get another win and get more in contention?
Yeah, I think Sven is still a really, like, a better AD carry than Hansama in terms of teamfight positioning and that kind of play. But the problem that I've seen for G2 in this series is just, like, they get leads to an extent, but their idea of playing around mid is a little bit awkward, because I think that, like, their idea of playing around mid is just having jungle be around mid, or just, like, gank mid or things of that nature. And when they're making plays to other lanes, I think that they have trouble consolidating or keeping pressure mid to an extent. So, for example, like in the RNG game, Perks wanted to go top, and they end up trading, like, a wave for a wave mid, but then Xiaohu just got, like, a lot of pressure and a lot of damage onto the mid turret initially, and was able to continue to pressure this advantage in the lane. So I think that there are a few issues with G2 in terms of that type of early setup. In terms of mid and late game, sometimes I don't like their lane assignments. I think that in this particular game against RNG, and then the game against Samsung, for example, they went for a really weird setup where they, like, decided to play with Ivern jungle, and that didn't translate for them very well into the team fights, and then Samsung just, like, out team fight them and did really well. So yeah, I mean, I think G2 are still a good team, and depending on the situation, like, it could have gone better with RNG, but I think RNG were just really, really good at maintaining and denying vision. So once they got a leg into the game, it was difficult for G2 to find openings after that. I also do agree with criticizing Expect. I think Expect had a few fumbles in the team fights that they played that kind of cost G2 opportunities to get advantages. So.
Okay. Could G2 still get out of the group, Wickd? Like, is there a world in which they just play so well against RNG and Samsung, they turn it around?
I still think they can make it out. They're still a good team, right? I just think they have a much harder situation right now because they're one game down where Misfits is even, and they have to climb up the stairs, right? The Misfits just have to step one time up.
Yeah.
If they play really well, if they're on the A game, they can make it out. Do I think it's going to happen? It's somewhat unlikely. But it's a possibility, right? Just like it's a possibility that everything goes kaboom during Season 4.
How is it, okay, that in G2 they managed to win all these splits of LCS, and yet I've actually never in any split ever heard anyone who's an expert praise Expect? How did they manage to win all these LCS splits without it ever being an issue that, I mean, not only do they have a player who's not very highly rated, but he's also an import, he's a Korean. Like in theory you'd think just get an EU player then and have better team play, you know. What do you think?
But it's also hard, right? Because a lot of people rate Expect lowly, including myself. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's actually as bad as he seems, right? Because it all depends where a team puts resources. And a top laner is often the guy that gets screwed over in that regard.
Sure.
So perhaps they're just not putting resources into him and he's never being allowed to carry and he's just having the support role. And then he's actually doing somewhat well as a support role, right? And he's just trying to help the team carry. So there's a lot of different ways a top laner can play, and it all depends what situation they really put him in and how's the team atmosphere is and everything, and also the communication.
Okay. Kelsey, what's your take on this? Like, is this like the EU version of Mouse on EDG, somehow winning all the splits and then coming to Worlds and every international tournament, and you're like, why is he on the team?
I don't think he's as bad as Mouse. Like, I don't wish that upon him. But I do think that I would guess that it's something along the lines of him being like a very good team player or having, like, I've heard he has a really, really good attitude and the environment is really good as a result.
Okay.
So I would guess that it has a lot to do with that. Of course, when you talk to them, they always talk about like how sick he is as a player because he's on their team, right? And that makes sense. But I do think that it has a lot to do with environmental situation and just like the team being comfortable with him as well.
Okay. Because the thing is, I actually know within the context of European esports, G2 is a team that has a lot of money. Like for anyone who doesn't know, in CSGO, for example, they paid a massive amount of money in terms of salaries to get like one of the best European teams. And actually, that's one of the reasons why they're very good in multiple games. So you would think if they really wanted a different top lane, I'm sure they could sign someone. Like if you're describing here, like in general, they're playing around Perks, they're playing around Sven. Shouldn't this just be a team who goes next season to like Odoamne or something and just says, here's a blank check, like come and join our team, like you'll be the perfect player, right?
The problem with that though could be that what if Perks only looks that good because he gets the pressure? What if Sven only looks that good because he gets the pressure, right? Like what if their play is elevated because Expect is giving up resources and then they get in Odoamne or another carry top lane, let's say Fire, whoever, right? A carry top laner. Then now they have to put resources to the top and maybe you see mid lane or AD carry faltering.
Okay. I mean, I think that Odoamne's been a pretty fucking low econ top lane. I just think this season he had nuclear, so he had to play carries sometimes, you know. So maybe that's just, 6 of one, 12 of the other, or whatever it is that's saying, right? Okay, here's the question then. So we've gone past G2. Now let's get into the meat of it, which is the two teams at the top of this group. Kelsey, you were like, you did give some praise to RNG coming into the group, but you were convinced Samsung was going to top the group, right?
Yeah, I actually still think Samsung topped the group. I think that the composition that they ended up giving RNG was actually insanely good. Because the champions aren't just good in isolation, but they're really good together, like Jarvan Galio, Tristana, Janna, all of these setups. It was like a really, really good situation for them. I think that they also had pressure in every lane, and then they executed really well off of that. So
what was the logic then? Yeah. Like theory craft it from Samsung's point. What's the logic of giving them all winning lanes?
Well, I think what Samsung wanted to do was they wanted to just scale up, and then they had the Twitch Rise combo, which should allow them to set up a good collapse in the mid lane and come back from there and snowball that way. It's just that I think that RNG were really good about consolidating like their resources mid, keeping the rivers cleared. Like one thing that I think RNG have been really, really good at this tournament, which they weren't good at in the LPL, is vision denial. Like their vision denial has been really on point. They prioritize getting sweepers really, really early, and then just clearing out river and grouping and looking to pressure mid. I actually think that Samsung, to an extent, misplayed because they kept trying to get minions and pushing out the sideways really well on Rise and Maokai, which should have set them up to like do a collapse earlier, but they didn't play that out very well. And I think part of it again is the vision denial. But I think that in general, like RNG got the advantages they needed. They had a super good composition, and they closed it. So I think that probably won't happen again. Like, having talked to Samsung after done an interview with Samsung after the Fenerbahce game, for example, they said that the reason why they played with like the Ezreal and that sort of thing is because they wanted to play like more early game focused after losing to RNG in that sense. So I think they're identifying some of the issues that they had. Maybe they definitely went too far the other way, and I think they should bring Ambition back because their bearing control is terrible without Ambition. So, yeah.
Is it notable that we've now had a Chinese team perfect game a Korean team? Is that notable? Does the meta just allow it more now? What's your thoughts?
I think it's notable. I think it's still like something that's praiseworthy because I do think that RNG closed extremely well and played much better in terms of vision control than I thought they would. So I think it's still notable, but I do think to an extent the meta is such that if you have like a good team fighting composition and you get a lead early, you should be able to just group mid and not get picked off and close. So,
okay. And like in this group, is Xiaohu the best mid laner?
In this group, I don't know if he's the best mid laner because I think so far in these games they've given him really, really good matchups. But I mean,
you are allowed to do that, you know. You are allowed to actually give your star players. I know some teams are unaware of this, but yeah.
Like they will even give their side lanes bad matchups and then give Xiaohu a good matchup, and they'll prioritize getting kills on Xiaohu over getting objectives sometimes early on because they feel like if you have like a champion being mid laner being really strong and then you put him in a side lane or you put him in any lane, and like they can't contest the wave, and so if they can't contest the wave, then they can't like interfere with your vision, I think is the rationale. So they'll even prioritize like putting kills and getting Xiaohu ahead. Yeah. So it's sometimes hard to tell without directly looking at his laning. When I have looked at his laning, he's been really good and really on point. Like he understands his matchups really well. I think he's probably the most consistently good mid laner in the group because I think Crown has shown potentially a higher ceiling in the past. Perks has had like really, really high highs, but Crown and Perks have both had moments recently where they have struggled a bit. So I think perhaps he's the most consistent mid laner at the moment, but it's hard to definitely say that like Crown or Perks are not as good because they're both extremely good mid laners as well in the past.
So Wickd, obviously, you know, for you, perfect game in Koreans. I mean, you've been there, you've done that, you know. I don't know what China was waiting for all those years, you know. What do you actually think of Samsung Galaxy RNG matchup then? Because that was obviously the one where, like, it's funny that so many people on Reddit always, I've said this before, always make fun of like LS and Monty because they make out like all they do is just sit there and go, every Korean team will beat every other team in the world. But they don't really do that. Like, for example, I've always mentioned this, they always have some they think aren't that good. But every fan did that. Every fan was like, well, obviously Samsung Galaxy will win this group. And when I would be like, but why? They'd be like, well, last year they were really good. Well, no, but why now would they though? Well, the Koreans, like, that's about it. You know, there's no real reason as to why. So what do you think of how this has played out? Like, was it a surprise to you, RNG won?
So if you just look at the team comps, right? If you look at the team comps from the game, it wasn't a Andy Snowball crazy or anything. They just had the right picks, and Samsung Galaxy had completely terrible picks. Like they couldn't do anything. There's nothing they could do. They could never kill anybody with Twitch. They could never get in. They could never get some of the important targets. It's just a bad team comp, and it can happen to any team, right? It doesn't really matter how good a team you have, because sometimes you'll make a mistake in the team comp, and you will lose because of it, right?
Like, was part of the issue here that they had this very specific comp in mind, or could they have just like changed out one piece and still had the comp be the concept work but have a better chance in lane?
I'm not sure if they could just change one piece, but I hope personally that I see Kuba and a carry champion. I've watched him, like he's streaming on Twitch actually, Kuba, and I watch him every time he stream almost if I'm not streaming myself. And he's an extremely good top laner. He's in my top 3 top laners for this tournament individually. So I don't want to see him playing a Maokai because like he can't actually show any of his skill. And then they just need to pick champions that are better. I don't think this match actually shows anything to me because I think it was a match that was doomed to fail just because of the picks, not because of the play.
Okay. Like Kelsey, can you theory craft at all? Why would a Korean team think that this was actually going to work though? Like, did they just really think that RNG wouldn't be able to do anything for whatever 20 minutes, and then somehow they'd start to be in good position? They were just going to stay safe until then. Like, isn't this kind of a bizarre misstep for a Korean team?
Yeah, I think that it's weird that they drafted like this, but I think in Samsung's mind, almost because they had like the ability to, they had Maokai, they had Sejuani, they had Rise, Twitch, Rakan. They had really, really insane potential to get picks on, for example, like Syndra if she got caught out, and then come back into the game from that. So I think, and then their team comp theoretically had really good team fighting. Like Twitch is an insanely strong carry champion, especially if you just like rush Runans. And then you end up in a situation where like Twitch can almost solo carry team fight. Like he can abuse Ardent really, really hard with the Runan's item setup. So yeah, I think that I in their heads this could have been a good team comp if they could get back into the game after a deficit, but I don't think it was good. Like I agree that it wasn't a very good plan overall.
No, but I even think like the team comp wise, I would just say if I take these two team comps, put them roughly even into 20 minutes in the game, I still give the game to RNG because I think in team fights it's so much easier for them to kill people, and it's really hard
I think it's a lot easier for them to execute.
It's really hard to get. It's really hard for Samsung Galaxy to actually kill somebody because if let's say they go on Syndra, then you're gonna have the Galio ulti, you're gonna have the Jan ulti to throw people back, you're gonna have the Tristan ulti to maybe ultimate the Twitch away, so he's not gonna be doing damage. There's so many things to stop the damage from Samsung Galaxy, and it's so easy for RNG to just one-shot somebody on Samsung Galaxy as well. So I think it's just team comp. It's not even about scaling or anything. It's just a bad team comp overall that they just got countered by the enemy team comp, right? They just straight up got countered by the enemy champions, and that was the problem. And they probably didn't expect some of the picks from the enemy team, or maybe they have never played against this before, right? Because there's so many different combinations. League, you can't know all of them. You can't expect all of them, and they just got caught off guard.
I do think mentally there was some disrespect because like if you can get a pick, I still think like with Twitch you're fundamentally playing like a pick comp. They do have a lot of options for pick, so they expected some kind of mispositioning would be my theory. Like I don't think that the comp is good overall, but I'm trying to understand the rationale, and this is like in my head why they would have picked it. So.
Okay. Do you think there's anything to the logic I get? So I'm sure you have everyone listening to this show has heard the famous narrative that when Koreans play a series, early in the series, they sometimes let through a lot of the power picks for the other team just to see like how would we deal with that? Like what would you do if they like what would essentially we want to see what the other team would be like at their best. Now, in theory, you wouldn't do that in a group because it's a best of one, but if you actually think that, you know, you're definitely getting out your group, you might save some stuff for the playoffs. You might think, well, I'm trying to see what happens when I play SK Telecom later, or I'm trying to see, you know, is there any logic to that? Is there any chance of that, or is that just spinning out a narrative too far? What do you think?
I think it's just bullshit, personally, because if you look at all the tournaments and so on, all the teams are screaming it's all. The teams generally know the picks and everything. And if somebody had prepared something, they're not going to show it to you, right? If they want to show it later in the tournament. And also there's been tournaments where Koreans didn't make it out, right? So I think every team is fighting for every single game, doing their absolute best to win every game. And sometimes you just have a bad situation, right? Sometimes you have a bad pick, you make a mistake, a small mistake here or there, and it can cost the whole game, right? Like small mistakes in League can snowball really hard in a pro player situation.
Okay. Kelsey, what do you think?
I don't like the reason why I'm trying to justify Samsung's team comp so hard is because I don't want to say that like they just didn't respect RNG at all, or that they just thought the game would be easy, because I don't think that is really the rationale that you go into a group stage with, regardless of what kind of team you are. Regardless of whether you're a Korean team or anything like this, because it's a best of one, and you know that you can lose a single game. Like Samsung themselves lost last year to TSM, and they said that they learned from that they need to pick something that they're extremely comfortable with to do well in best of ones, is something that they said afterwards. So I think that they understand what can happen in best of ones. They understand what can happen in group stage. So I don't think that they just drafted this composition because they had major disrespect. It had to have some kind of logic to it, even if like they obviously probably made some misstep in the draft phase. It probably had some logic to it.
Okay. Has the infamous Uzi world buff been applied again?
I don't think it's a UZI world buff in this case. I think that he still played well in the regular season. I think his final was terrible. For example, like he played terribly in the final, but that was at this point in LPL finals, there has to be some kind of mental pressure for UZI because
in the finals, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because he just like doesn't win, and in the 5th game he played so bad. It was awful. Like he was melee positioning on Ashe and missing like every arrow. So like there has to be some sort of mental pressure with UZI in the LPL final. I think overall though, he's playing this tournament about as well as he played LPL during the regular season.
Okay.
Obviously, I think some international teams are not as used to the way UZI plays laning phase, which tends to be really oppressive, and he'll just like give up CS to contest waves sometimes. So yeah, I think that tends to make him look a little bit better to an extent as well, but I don't think he's playing like that much better than he did in this year.
So you were someone I remember on the pre-Worlds episode who actually gave like extra credit to Ruler and said he looked like improved this year. So here's my question, as I'm mistaking you with Emily, which I mean that has happened before. Do you actually, which side of the fence do you come down on? Where I did a tweet the other day where I was rewatching the Samsung versus RNG game, and in the pre-game, Deficio, for some reason, just actually decides to be bold and say he thinks actually Ruler is better in the late game as an AD carry than Uzi as well. And I have to say, listen, it's an opinion, you can have them, but I did, when I saw that, think to myself, did you only watch the LPL final, Deficio? Like, I'm starting to wonder now, because I don't, like, maybe it's just me, I don't see Ruler as some, like, beast late game AD carry. I realize his team plays late game 24/7, but what's your take on this? Where do you come down on it?
I think Ruler has improved a lot, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think he's one of the best AD carries at this tournament, and I think UZI is. I think that Ruler is still a really strong... He's better probably in team fights, but I think where he's made most of his improvements this year has actually been laning phase. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think he's like some god AD carry now.
Okay. Right. Wickd. It's rare that Chinese teams actually beat Korean teams, obviously. Can RNG actually go super deep? Like, could they go to the final? Could they win Worlds? What do you think?
Well, obviously, the two favorites is Longzhu and SKT, right? But I think like SKT have been winning so many tournaments, and I think every single time there was a chance of an upset where they would have lost. I think the scenario was that the only team from Korea that I actually thought was unbeatable was Samsung White. I believe it called. I think it was called Samsung White, right? Like we got absolutely destroyed by them. We scrimmed them. I think we won 1 game against them, maybe 2 because we aced them level 1 or something. But we could never beat them. I thought they were unbeatable, and I haven't seen any other Korean team be at that stage where they're completely unbeatable and untouchable, right? So
but is RNG good enough to beat them though?
I think RNG could beat them if they have their day. Like it all depends on the day, right? It all depends on who's performing on that day, who's going to show up, and who is better on that day. Who's the better team on that day?
So, Kelsey, you've already essentially teased that you don't think that because you already think that Samsung's still going to win the group. So, RNG, this was just a one-off.
I will say that not only are RNG playing like the best LPL team in group stage, but they actually did make improvements. I already mentioned their vision. I think that they actually almost trend too much towards mid, and they didn't try to match Samsung in side lane at all, or they didn't try to match G2 in side lane at all when they were playing G2. So I think that there are definitely some flaws still there that are exploitable with side lane wave control that teams can take advantage of, and that's something that SKT, for example, are really good at. I also think that in best of 5 series is where I come down more on RNG than I come down even on EDG or WE. Is because I think in best of 5, their adaptation and their ability to do that isn't as strong as some of the other teams. And for SK Telecom, that's like always their strength, right? Is how well that they're able to do this. And I even said before this is that if G2 get out of group, I actually feel like they had the potential to go further in the tournament because they will have similar strengths and weaknesses in terms of best of 5 adaptation. Okay. But RNG should do better in the group context. Yeah.
Wickd, who has been the most impressive player at Worlds so far for you? Who stands out? Who do you think had a great tournament so far?
Impressive player. I feel like that's really hard to say right now due to the meta. I think the meta is awful for individual skill in the laning phase and so on. I think players don't actually get to show their skill because it's too easy to play passive due to how much healing there is and everything. So standing out is very difficult and it's more of a team effort right now, which I don't like at all. And I actually won't be able to mention a player standing out enough because you just can't dominate your lane as you used to be able to do in some of the seasons, right? You could dominate your lane, you could actually snowball the game alone and carry. And I don't really feel like that's possible in this patch. So it's very hard to stand out and you have to do it as a team effort. And there's not going to be a carry player this year, in my opinion, that dominates Worlds. There's going to be a team that plays well together.
Who's the de facto for you at the moment, Kelsey?
I think you can make comments on players that have looked really well in group context. Like, I think Maxler has played really well. Like, he's been a standout player for me. I think other players that have done really well. Let's see. I mean, UZI has had like a really good game against G2.
A lot of kills against Samsung, obviously.
Yeah. Let's see. Has anyone really stood out though?
But like, if you just take the player you mentioned Maxler, right? Yeah. He only stood out in team scenarios where the team's like, let's go in, let's do plays. And he made really great plays in those scenarios. But it was still the team effort coming into it, right? It was the team setting it up, there was the team doing everything. And then he made a really good team fight happen. And I think those kind of things is very on and off, right? Because you're not going to have good team fights consistently as good as Maxler had. That's why I don't think it's going to be necessarily a standout player.
I mean, still, like, for me, I think also his ability to play off of, and you can all still argue that these are team decision makings, but the thing that stands out more to me about Maxler, and I do think that this is Maxler driven because he shows this on a lot of his teams, not just Misfits, and it actually took him a while, like it always takes him a while to start to show this, was the decision making in terms of early pathing and where he's going to apply pressure to lanes or where he's going to place his vision has always been like really solid for Maxler. And I think that that was a big part of why they did well and were able to snowball super hard against TSM. So for me, like that's more what I'm talking about when I feel like Maxler has had a standout performance.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Who has been the most underwhelming player so far? Like who came in with the big expectations, and thus far we haven't really like seen them at that level at Worlds. Who would you say? There's got to be someone.
Source against Dark Champions.
So as in every game then.
I think it's hard because he was set up for failure, but he's been extremely underwhelming. It is not necessarily his fault, but the stats says he's underwhelming. He couldn't have done much. He was completely useless in most of the games, and that's just the fact, right? Like, is it unfair to watch him that he's the one that take? Probably. Does he deserve it? Probably not. But I don't think anybody has been as underwhelming as he have so far.
Okay.
But I think he'll step up.
Kelsey, in a weird way, I've always thought that actually we should change the Dade award to the Clearlove award because Dade himself only really won it once and Clearlove's won it like a lot of times. Has Clearlove actually been all right this Worlds?
So I could make a really terrible joke here, which is that EDG ended up downgrading all of their players so that Clearlove wouldn't be the one that everyone blamed for Worlds.
Approach. Yeah, it's a bold approach.
But I actually think he has had a decent tournament. Like, he obviously Rek'Sai is his best champion. He had some weird Jarvan engages in the C9 game, but overall I didn't think that his play in that game was that bad. I feel like Mako underperformed really hard this tournament as well. So I expected Mako to be really good and to be pretty consistent in that regard. So maybe for me, Mako is the most surprisingly underwhelming player. But I think overall, Edward Gaming, like, this would be the year where you don't blame Clearlove, I guess, in general.
Fair enough. Right, do you have any final words, Wickd?
Thank you for having me on the show, Brian.
Okay.
I had a good time.
Everyone watch your Twitch and all YouTube and all that. Trying to make it as a content creator now. It's a tough world out there.
It's a tough world, man. 2 hours of sleep in 2 days now, but it's okay.
It's okay.
We're having fun.
Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.